Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest. Have a look at the headlock here. See that chap over there? Get your hand off my penis! What is the charge?
Drinking a beer? A succulent Chinese beer? This is Brewing Manifest, and today we clone a Tsingtao. This is a Chinese rice lager brew day. Let's get started. Now, to get started with this succulent Chinese beer brew day, we need to set up our grain bill. In this case today, we are going to be running with 63% of our grain bill being straight Pilsner malt, 4% being medium crystal malt, and 3% being gladiator malt / dextrin malt for that extra mouthfeel, extra head retention, and just general substance and body to the beer. Because this being a rice lager, we do run the risk of things getting a little bit on the lighter side, and I want that head retention and that little bit of chewiness to the beer to be retained, because we need it to be succulent, right? So let's start the roller, shall we? We're gonna see if it works this time. That is the grains crushed. Now, for those of you that are actively paying attention, you may have noticed that my math was a little bit off there. We're missing about 30% of this grain bill. That's because this is a Chinese rice lager, so let's go talk rice. Now, because this is a Chinese rice beer, we're gonna need one very important thing. A whole bunch of rice. This here is Chinese long grain rice, which is more common to the south of China, whereas if you go more to the northeast of China, if memory serves right, medium grain rice like jasmine is more common. The medium grain rice is a little bit stickier, a little bit more goopy after it's been cooked, so it's great for making things like congee or sticky rice dishes, but that does make things like brewing a little bit more difficult. So by using a long grain rice that tends to be fluffier and less sticky after it's cooked, we should have less issues when it comes to sparging. However, we can't just go ahead and throw this rice straight into our mash tun because we need to gelatinize it first. So we're going to tip it into a pot, fill it just above with water as if you're going to cook rice for lunch, and boil the bejesus out of it. We want to boil it on a low royal for about 30 minutes. At that point, it would have been gelatinized and we can actually release the starches and the sugars contained in the rice. So rice to pot, pot to boil, 30 minutes, Bob's your uncle. The name of the game for our Chinese beer is balance. The Chinese are all about zen and yin and yang and things working in harmony, so the beer should be as well. What we want here is our beer to be extremely tame on the water profile. Something we learned from the Czech Pilsner that we made on the channel a little while back, link to that video up there, one of my favorite beers I've ever brewed, was that having a extremely soft and subdued water profile really allowed you to cram in more hops without getting extra bitterness and let all the maltiness of the beer kind of come into effect and be the star of the show and be at the forefront. So we're going to be doing the same thing here as well. We're going to run with 22 parts per million of calcium, 5 of magnesium, 15 of sodium, 31 chloride, 30 sulfate, and 57 parts bicarbonate. All we're doing here is having a balance of 1-to-1 between the chloride and the sulfate. Everything else is about keeping those parts per million as low as possible. So if you have the ability to do so, don't have the bicarbonate in there, reduce a lot of those factors and just keep those numbers really on the low side so that you can allow the delicate subtleties of the rice flavors and the grains to work together and be at the front of the palate. Now we can mash in. Miscalculations were made. I totally forgot about how much rice blows up when you cook it. So that little 2.4 kilos of whatever of rice it was in that little jug has now turned into 4 of these giant bowls of rice. So I've added on the extension onto our Brewzilla to actually accommodate all the extra grain that we're going to be throwing into this particular beer. So it should fit with the extension, but my word, without that, we could be in a little bit of trouble. So I'm gonna grab the grains, start throwing them in, and we can get mash in underway. Now, if I had had the foresight when I was building out this recipe and actually thinking about the realities of the logistics of working with this much goopy rice material, I would have gotten rice hulls. Don't know why I didn't do that. When I made the Japanese rice lager about 1.5 years ago now, linked to that video up there, excellent beer, I did use rice hulls and I was very happy with myself for it. Even though at the time I probably didn't need to because I was using flaked rice. So I think when I built this recipe, I thought, hey, flaked rice worked, real rice would be just as good. I think I'm gonna be proven very, very wrong, and I think we're gonna get a stuck sparge, but we're here now and we're gonna deal with it. So my recommendation to you would be to get some rice hulls for this one. I would recommend about 500 grams of rice hulls thrown in with the rest of this stuff. Here's a bunch of rice, number one, ready to go in. Probably could have done that a bit better. And now let's start blitzing this stuff together. We absolutely could use a mash paddle. I've got one right here. I typically use it now to fix my grain mill, but we're in the 21st century, which means we have power drills. So if you want to get one of these things to make mashing in a whole lot easier, there's a link down below of our affiliate program with Kegland. Go check it out. It gives us a small kickback when you use our link. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it helps us keep making videos like this for the channel. So if you want to help us out, go check it out down below next time you need to buy some new brewing equipment. Time to blitz. And that is mash in done. That actually went a lot easier so far than I was expecting, considering how gloopy all of that rice was. But that gelatinization step was absolutely critical. I didn't say it before, but I'll say it now. If you are trying to be lazy by buying flaked rice, because flaked rice is already steamed and rolled and gelatinized for you. Without the gelatinization step, you're not gonna actually be able to release the starches in a way that the enzymes can actually break them down for the yeast to be able to convert into alcohol, and you're just gonna have a bunch of rice that basically does nothing for the beer. So it's critical to gelatinize it before you actually go mashing in. That has all been mixed in now, so I'm gonna start recirculating this. I'm gonna grab that top filter over there. I am gonna start recirculating this, and we can call mash in done. I did that terribly. I'm gonna have to fix that in a minute. Let's fix that now. Sorry guys, I've got no cameraman and things are going wrong. All right, I fixed it up. We've got that plate on properly. We're gonna start recirculating and I'll add on the sparge head in a moment. But what's worth calling out right now is why I chose this specific grain bill. Japanese rice lagers and Chinese rice lagers are ridiculously similar in that they're both using rice, they're both Pilsner based, they both have European brewing technique origins. Where the differences largely are in the rice that's being used, because Japanese rice tends to be lighter, fluffier, less bold, I suppose you could say, when it comes to the world of brewing, whereas Chinese rice, particularly from the south of China, tends to be a little bit grainier, a little bit more robust, I guess you could say. So there's a subtle difference in the rice that gets used, but also in the actual grain structure itself. So typically a Chinese rice lager, despite being very similar to Japanese, will be a little more, for lack of better words, succulent. It's gonna have a little more crystal, a little more depth, a little more body than would the equivalent over in Japan, which focuses on lightness, crispness, dryness. Chinese rice lagers are all of those things, but they do have a little more body and a little more crystal-like malt structure to them, hence the medium crystal malt in this particular batch. So I'm gonna do a full video on describing the difference between the two once this one's done, but just for now, I wanted to give you that context on why we've structured the grain bill this way and why we've made it a little different to the Japanese equivalent. All this being said, take it with a grain of salt. If you know better than me and you know the difference between Chinese and Japanese, please comment in the links down below, in the comments down below, because This one took a little bit of researching to actually understand where the variances really are. Now, I'm gonna whack on the sparge head. We're gonna start recirculating this at 65 degrees Celsius? 64 degrees Celsius for 1 hour, followed by a mash out at 77 degrees Celsius to kill the enzyme activity. This is 40 liters of strike water. This will show up all throughout the screen in imperial or freedom units as well. And then we'll start getting to the sparge at the end of that hour. So we'll see you then. We are now sparging, and my God, that was difficult to lift by myself. By the way, the reason why the camera work on this video is so stable is because Odin, our typical cameraman and videographer, has decided that today he'd rather work than brew beer. So drop a comment down below, encourage him to be here for the next brew day, because I can't keep doing this by myself. Now, for the sparging, we're gonna run 20 liters of sparge water over the top of our grain bed. I suspect our grains are kind of draining okay at the moment, but they do get a little bit stuck with all that rice because of the gloopiness of it. And I think this rice is basically disintegrating into mush at this point. I've never had rice heated for this long. I guess this is extreme congee at this point. But just a little bit of a jiggle with a mash paddle to help things flow will kind of get you there. We're gonna run 20 liters over the top. I've already added my salts, my water profiles, my acids, etc. to adjust for pH. The one thing that I'll call out here if you're new to this world of brewing is that sparging is not necessary, but what you're basically doing is squeezing out extra sugars from the grains by running fresh hot water at 77 degrees Celsius over the top of that existing grain bed, because those grains trap all those sugars, they get all caught up together, so even though it drains out, you've got money left sitting on the table, so to speak. So by grabbing your water and running it over the top nice and gently, you'll be able to get more bang for buck. Now, I'm gonna do this with my 20 liters of sparge water. Once I've reached the end of that, we can move on to the fun part, which is boiling and adding hops. I'm kneeling now because got no cameraman. Sorry guys, if my knees give out, it's Odin's fault. But we are at a boil and it is time to add our boil hops. So we're going with our first addition, which is going to be a 60-minute boil addition of Saaz. I've chosen Saaz because I absolutely fell in love with the Czech style of beer, with that Czech Pilsner we made. I talk about it to death now on this channel, but I freaking loved it. And there's a second reason why I'm choosing Saaz, because Chinese lagers are largely based off European brewing methods. One of those methods being the types of hops we use. So noble hops like Saaz, your old school European lagering hops, are extremely common in Chinese style rice lagers. And Saaz specifically is gonna give us a bit of a floral aroma. It's kind of delicate, but it's also gonna give us a level of spicy herbal quality, which just adds this extra character and this extra can't quite put your finger on it flavor when you're drinking the beer. So I think it's going to pair perfectly with a more robust version of a rice lager, which is what this one is kind of intended to be. That was 2 ounces, by the way, / 57 grams, and is going to give us 8.7 IBUs. Now we'll come back with 30 minutes to go, where we add our next hop addition. At this point, it's also worth us jumping in. It's not 30 minutes hop addition yet, but I did just remember to take a gravity reading, a pre-boil gravity reading. So let's find out how boozy this Chinese beer has the potential to be. We are sitting at about 1.038, I want to say. So we might get up to somewhere in the ballpark of 1.042, I suppose, which at the end of it would ferment out probably to 10.08. So I'm guessing we're going to have something in the realm of a high 4%, maybe low 5% Chinese lager. That sounds pretty succulent to me. I think we're looking pretty good so far. We've now been boiling for 30 minutes, so it's time to add our 30-minute hop addition. This is going to be another 2 ounces / 57 grams of Saaz, which is going to give us an additional 6.5 IBUs. The purpose of the 30-minute addition here is A, just to give us a bit more of a bump on our bitterness, because we do want this to sit around a target of 20. And B, we're also gonna get some flavor contribution from this at the 30-minute mark. Nowhere near as much as what you'd get at 15, 10, or at a flame out, but we are gonna get elements of that spice and that herbal quality coming through. So we're gonna let this go for another 15 minutes before we come back and add Whirlfloc and our final hop addition. And now it is time for our final hop addition, another 15-minute addition of, you guessed it, Saaz. So this time we are running with 60 grams, which is just a smidge over 2 ounces. That's gonna give us 4.4 IBUs for a grand total of 20 IBUs, as well as throwing in our 1.5 grams of Whirlfloc, also known as Irish moss. That's just gonna help clarify everything, get a bit of hot break going once we finish boiling, and help us get some nice clear beer at the end of this. That Saaz addition now is really going to be the one that's giving us that herbal quality, that floral quality, that little bit of spiciness at the end of the palate. So all of that, I think, will balance quite nicely with the sweet body of this lager, relatively sweet body. And that body is going to be sweet not just from the crystal malts, but from the rice itself. Rice adds a very soft, gentle kind of sweetness, almost like a very light honey is what I found when I made the Japanese rice lager. So 15 more minutes to go, then we're gonna start cooling this thing down. And there we have it. We are now cooling down to yeast pitching temp, which in this case, because it's a lager, I do wanna go a little colder than normal, so I'll be happy if we can get our wort down to say around 15, 16 degrees Celsius. Happy to call it there, but as a bare minimum, we want to get under 20 or at 20 degrees before we pitch. Once we are getting there, we'll start transferring over into the tank, and then we can talk yeast. We are now transferring into the tank. This is ordinarily where I would say we're going to throw in our wrapped pill and give you the spiel about what it does, which is essentially a digital hydrometer that gives you real-time updates to your phone. However, I forgot to charge mine, so I'm not going to be throwing it in this time. But if you do want to check out a video where we go through all the details of this and if it's worth it, spoiler alert, it's awesome. Check out that link right there. It's an absolutely delightful new addition to the world of brewing. But this transfer is going on. Once we hit the end of that, then I will actually talk to you about yeast. At long last, we are ready to finally pitch the yeast for our succulent Chinese beer. And we're going to be running with SAF Lager's S23. You can use any lager choice here. The reason I'm using S23 is because A, it's extremely widely available globally, which means just about any home brewer is going to be able to get their hands on this. B, it's an extremely reliable workhorse yeast that just always produces very solid results. C, it's got quite a wide window in terms of the temperature you can ferment at. So if you don't have the ability to control your fermentation temperature the way that we do, you have a range of 12 to 18 degrees Celsius or 53.6 to 64.4 Fahrenheit, which is pretty decent for a lager strain, to be honest. And then outside of all of that, I just really like this yeast. It's a very clean fermenting lager yeast that still lets some esters shine through to add an extra element to the beer. Just a slight fruitiness does get produced from this yeast, which I think will be just delightful with the way that this recipe has been constructed. So I'm gonna ferment this at 14 degrees Celsius, whatever that is in freedom units, for about 2 weeks, I suspect primary will take. At the end of that, we'll do a diacetyl rest where we'll bump up the temperature for 3 days by 2 degrees Celsius, before finally beginning our cold crash. So, next time you guys see me will be when I'm holding a fresh pint of a Chinese lager. And here is the final result. Now, the first thing I absolutely have to say is, yes, I'm aware our beer is cloudy. I'm not gonna ask you this week to try and guess which one is different, unlike last week's clone video with Stone and Wood. Link to that video up there if you wanna check it out. But this is a lager, and it hasn't had the chance to lager yet, so just ignore the clarity for a brief moment and look at the colors. Once this clears out, I am very confident it is going to be bang on the same color as the Tsingtao here on my right. But the only way that you're gonna be able to see that update is down in Patreon. So if you do wanna check that out, link down below. That's where I do all the updates for beers from way back when, as well as plan future brew days like this one right here. Now, it's time for the taste test though. So let's start with our calibration, shall we? Okay, drinking at Tsingtao always makes me think of eating delicious Chinese food. Like, it's just, as soon as you taste it, because like, I think that's the only time I ever drink it. As soon as you taste Tsingtao, it's like, ooh, I'm at Yum Cha. I'm having a whole bunch of dumplings and barbecue pork and a whole bunch of greasy noodles, and it's delicious. It always makes me think of that, so even though it's a commercial beer, I always love it for exactly that reason. Let's go in for the clone, shall we? So good. Okay, there is something really specific about Chinese lagers that's very hard to put your finger on because it does taste different to Japanese lagers, and I think the difference is the sweetness. The Chinese lager has more of that caramel-based sweetness in the back of the palate that holds and lingers a lot longer than a Japanese lager. I'm gonna do a full video on the difference between these two, between Chinese and Japanese lagers in a future state at some point. But for right now, that's all I'm gonna say on it. It just lingers longer with more sweet character and a little more body and a little more maltiness, I suppose you could say. Not to say that it's a particularly malty beer, because it is still heavily rice-based and it's crisp, refreshing, it clears out the palate. That's just why it's so good with Chinese food. Like, it's a palate cleanser. It immediately dries out your mouth so that you're just so ready to go in for more food. But is it a clone? It is so close. What I need is for this beer to lager out, because that's gonna clean up the flavor a little bit more. At the moment, it's still somewhat all over the place. It hasn't had that time to get that cleanness, that clean finish that you really need from a lager. And I really think that is because it just hasn't had enough time to settle out yet and kind of piece itself back together. I've literally poured this one fresh out of the tank. I haven't even kegged it yet. So I am definitely gonna do an update video for you Patreons in like 3 months from now on how much this one clears out, and then test it again to see how clone worthy it truly is. But ignoring the lack of cleanness on the finish, it is ridiculously similar. So similar. It's got that same crisp finish. It's got that same mouth cleansing thing going on. I think it's very, very similar in terms of the sweetness. Very similar sweetness. Like, it's that cloying, not cloying, that's the wrong descriptor, but it's that like lingering caramel-based sweetness. And a bit of that, I guess, that rice sweetness too. That is so distinctive in rice-based beers. The bitterness, I think, is pretty bang on the same. My one is probably slightly, ever so slightly less bitter. So I'd love to know what the IBUs are of a Tsingtao, because that's the only difference I'm noticing so far. And then the hop profile, again, extremely similar. So I suspect maybe Tsingtao does actually use Saaz, because it's got that floralness, it's got that kind of slight earthiness going on, that tinge of spice. And so does ours. They're very similar, very, very similar in the hop profile. What I'm definitely gonna do is get Odin to do a blind taste test of both of these, because unfortunately now that I've seen it and I know what this one tastes and feels like, I don't think a blind taste test is gonna work on me. But I'm definitely gonna get Odin to, our cameraman, if you're new to this channel, to taste both of these beers and under a blindfold and see if he can actually pick the difference, because they're even similar in the stats. They are both exactly 4.5% ABV. I believe both of their IBUs are in incredibly similar ballparks. I'm pretty sure Tsingtao is actually 19 IBUs, which is what mine came out at. So they are ridiculously similar. I call this an incredibly successful cloning experiment. So now I need to say a thank you to our Patreons. Thank you, Patreons, for supporting the channel all the time in the background and for giving us all that commentary over the last few weeks about what videos we should be getting ready to brew for the Christmas season. So if you want to have your vote in what beers we're going to brew out for the rest of the remaining 2025 year, please jump on Patreon down below. That's where we have all the chats around what beers we should brew, what videos we should do next, what topics we should explore. Thank you, Patreons, for your suggestions. And we do have another Patreon recommended brew day coming out very, very soon. So until then, guys, cheers. We'll catch you next time.